Hello, people of St. Peter and Paul's Parish. The Lord be with you. It's good to be with you again, even though in this strange way last week I was sort of feeling odd recording a homily alone here in my room. It's even more odd to be trying to do it by video this week, but uh, let's give it a try and see how it goes. So this is the fourth Sunday of Lent. We're at the midpoint of the Lenten season, and the readings today are all about seeing. I hope you had a chance to read them. They're at the link in the email I sent with this video, and they're also available by a link on our website. And we hear about seeing in the first reading, where we hear the story of Samuel the prophet anointing the young David to be king. And Samuel has to learn a little bit about seeing. God says to him, not as human beings see does God see, because humans see the appearances, but the Lord looks into the heart. So let's pray that through our reflections and prayers today, we can begin to see more in the way that God sees, that we can see the world and the situation we're in now with the eyes and the love of God. So let's move on to the gospel, where this man who was born blind has this amazing encounter with Jesus. And the question that I want to explore with you is, once he's healed, what exactly does he see? And I'm going to lead us through three brief reflections. First of all, he sees himself in a new way. Secondly, he sees Jesus. And through Jesus, he's able to see God differently, to get a different picture of God and his relationship with God than he's had. And finally, he sees other people and the world around him in the light of God's love. He begins to see the world as God sees. So, the story begins with a question. The disciples are walking along with Jesus. They see this blind man probably sitting begging at the side of the road. And the disciples ask him, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be blind like this from birth? Jesus answers that question for sure, but we'll see the fullness of his answer as we go through this whole gospel and reflect on it together. But his initial answer to the question is that he heals the blind man. And in this healing, the blind man not only begins to see in a physical sense, but he begins to see himself differently because his life has been touched in this way, because he's had this encounter with Jesus, and it begins a process of change and growth in him. And we can see this by the reactions of other people around him and his conversation with them. They say to him, well, are you the guy that we used to see sitting here blind by the road? And he says, yeah, I am. Well, what happened? Well, he doesn't exhibit much understanding at this point. He says, well, this guy they call Jesus came and put this paste on me and told me to wash, and he healed me. Now I can see. And they said, well, where is he? He goes, well, I don't know. But the people take him to the Pharisees, and they begin to talk with him. And at the end of their first conversation with him, they say, well, what do you think about this man, Jesus? And here we see something different emerge. The man says he's a prophet. This shows that he's begun to see something about Jesus, but he's also seeing himself differently because he's realizing that he's not an anonymous nobody. He's finding his voice. He's realizing that he has something to say that's based on his real experience of God's grace and action in his life. He's got something to say, and he's going to begin to say it now. I think this could well be a lesson for all of us. at this time of the coronavirus epidemic. We might feel that we're stranded at home. We might feel helpless. We might feel powerless. We might feel that we're like nobodies. But that's not who we are as Christians, as disciples of Jesus, as beloved children of God. We're not nobodies. We're somebody. We have voice. We have agency. And we have a voice that can speak in this world. Maybe it's just to our family members around us or people we're talking to on the phone. But we've got a voice and we can speak words of consolation, of hope, of promise, of faith, and love. And these words that we speak can make a big difference in the lives of those around us, especially if maybe they don't have faith or hope at the moment and they're caught in fears and anxieties or depression. Uh, we've got a voice, and it's God's voice coming through us, and we can speak that and share words of light and hope with our friends and families. Now, when the man says that Jesus is a prophet, that brings me to my second point, that he really is starting to see who Jesus is. And through Jesus, he sees something new about God. He begins to see more clearly who God is. And this comes out in his second conversation with the Pharisees, who keep returning to the theme of sin. They say, well, we know this man must be a sinner. He healed you on the Sabbath. And by the way, you're a sinner. You're just a humble peasant. Who do you think you are, trying to teach us and talk to us? But the man comes back to them. He's got even more of a voice and more strength now, and he says, well, this is strange that you don't know where he comes from or who he is. He says it's unheard of that anybody born blind could be healed. If this man can do things like this, he must be from God. Now, this shows that the man is reflecting really on what Jesus has revealed to him. He's realizing that God is not in the business of judgment and condemnation and punishment. This gets back to that question that the disciples ask at the beginning of the story. You know, who sinned, this man or his parents? They just presume, well, if there's evil in this world, if they're suffering, it's because humans have sinned and God is punishing them. But Jesus completely wipes that away and says it's not about that at all. And I'm going to show you by healing him. God is in the business of healing, not judgment, not punishment, not condemnation. God is compassion. God is mercy. God is love. And he's all about saving this human family. And the man in the story has certainly begun to see this and to understand it. This also applies to us. You know, there are certainly going to be preachers in some churches that are going to read this situation that way and say, oh, the human race is being punished by God for all its evil sins. And we see voices like that even in the Catholic Church, with some incidents recently in our diocese that have even touched our parish. There are plenty of church people who are ready to portray a God who's all about judgment and condemnation and exclusion. But Jesus is all through the gospel giving us a different message. He's opening our eyes. I like St. Paul says in that second reading today, awake, sleeper, arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. Wake up. That's not what God is like. God is about compassion, care, and love. And the man sees that. The question for us is, in our circumstance today, in what we're suffering, what we're going through, can we see that God really is a God of love and care and compassion, and not a God who's judging or punishing us? So this brings me to the third point, that the man begins to see people and the world around him in a different way, to see them with the eyes of God. And this has two aspects, both a negative and a positive. First of all, in his dialogue with the Pharisees, it's clear that his eyes are open and he begins to see through the Pharisees, see through the systems of this world, see through the social conventions around him that presume that God is interested in judgment and punishment. And we also, at this time, can have our eyes open because of this epidemic and because of the situation we're in, to see through some of the systems of this world more deeply. I think of the poor people who are poor workers, the first to lose their jobs, the first to experience great hardships, and they'll be the last to get the medical care they need. So we begin to see through things, and to see reality for what it is. But more positively, the man begins to see that through his human experience of someone who showed compassion for him, showed care for him, brought healing words to him, that through this he has experienced the goodness of God, and he realizes that the goodness in the human race is a sign of God's love and God's goodness. Not really a sign, it's not a symbol, it's the reality. In experiencing the goodness and the compassion and the love of other people, we're actually experiencing God. Our eyes are open like this man to see the presence of God in other people. I think in this situation of, let me just use one example. One of our parishioners who is an emergency room physician, and she has two little children. Think of what she's going through. She's at high risk every day now, and she's worried about her family and her children probably. And there are thousands and thousands of medical workers like this in our country right now who are putting themselves at risk in order to be people of healing and compassion and service to others. And not just medical people, but the many countless workers who are in jobs where they can't stay home, like me here in my office. They have to go into work. They have to continue serving. And this is a wonderful testimony to us, and an experience in other people's service and care and love and self-sacrifice. We see what God is like. We experience God's love. We experience the self-giving of Jesus. We experience his self-sacrifice and his compassion. Are our eyes open? In however dark the days might be in the weeks to come, let's not focus on that darkness. Let's not focus on the suffering that's around us, real though it is and inescapable though it is. But rather, can our eyes be open at the same time to see the immense outpouring of human goodness around us, to see those who continue to serve in the face of risk, to see those who continue to love, to care, to be instruments of God's compassion and healing.